So once you've installed ZBrush Core Mini, you should load it up and you'll be presented with this screen right here. As you can see, it's a pretty minimal interface. There's not a lot going on, and that's to our advantage. In fact, it's something I really like about it. It's not bogged down with tons of menus and submenus and whatnot. So I'm going to be going over the whole interface screen right now and show you what each little icon means and does. So starting from the top left, we're going to be going clockwise. There's an open project and a save project. Hopefully those are self-explanatory. So if you just started out and you do some sculpting, you can save it and then open it later. So right here, there's you have two primitives you can start to work with. There's a sphere and a rectangle. Now, one thing to keep in mind for these is if you click on one or the other, it'll erase what you're currently doing. It'll ask if you want to save your current project. So right now the sphere is on the screen, so I'll select the cube, and you can see the project has changed. Would you like to save the scene? So no. And now I have this cube, which also has kind of a rough texture on it to make it look like more like rock. So it depends what you want to start with. In this case, I usually start with a sphere, since that closely resembles a head, which is what we're going to be doing. Next up on the interface, you'll notice this icon, which if you hover over it, activates the symmetry. And you also notice a letter next to it, which is X, which is the hotkey for turning on and off this feature. So symmetry, if you could see on the sphere, you can see the icon, the cursor, is represented on both sides of the model. So that means whatever you do on one side reflects to the other. So this is obviously a huge time saver when it comes to modeling things like heads, and you'll leave it on for most of the time. However, towards the end of making an organic character, I usually turn it off and make some imperfections that would appear, because no human or animal or anything organic is perfectly symmetrical on either side. So for now, just remember that's turning it on and off, and the hotkey is X. Next to that, we'll find the draw size, and this is a slider which determines the size of your brush stroke. It's pretty self-explanatory. And the hotkey for that, if you hover over it, is S. So this is a good one to get in a habit of using the hotkey, because you press S and you could just drag the slider right there on over your sculpture. So you're not going up to here and adjusting it from there. If you're a Photoshop user, you can also recognize these hotkeys, and that's the brackets, and they'll slowly enlarge and shrink your brush size. Moving along, we'll have the Z intensity, and that is how much pressure or flow is coming out of this virtual sculpting brush. So right now it's set at 25. If I were to drag it down to 9 or 10, lower my brush size, you can see it builds up very slowly. And again, going to the hotkey is U. So if I hover here and hit U, I can drag it here, and now I'm at 91, and it's going to build it up much quicker. So you can play around with that if you're trying to get an effect very quickly, or just doing something rather subtle. Moving along from there, we're at this point where we're going to see how many polygons are in our scene. Now, whatever you're sculpting is comprised of polygons. I'm just going to jump over here and turn this on, and we'll get to that in a moment. And you can see all the detail is made up of polygons, these little squares. And up here it tells you how many polygons you have on your model. So the more polygons you have, the more detailed it will or can be. However, you just don't want to be going up to high polygons right away, and just for the sake of it, thinking I can get more detail. I'm going to advocate working in a kind of a low to high workflow, meaning we'll start working with low polygons and then gradually add detail. And as you add detail, it'll raise the polygon count, but it's much easier to get your forms right on a low polygon model than on a high one initially. And I'll go over that later when we go over the brushes. But in this active polygon count, there's a low, medium, and high. And this is acts to reduce the mesh to a certain threshold. So you can see I hover over to low and it says reduces mesh to 150K polygons. That's 150,000. And you can use that if you find your model's getting to a higher resolution. Maybe you find it's working a little slower as you're working over it. I often try to lower it and see what I can get away with. What it does is it reduces the number of polygons in your mesh, and it might lose some details, but you can always undo it if you don't like how much it's taken away. So the low threshold is 150K, there's a 300K, and then a 500K. It also should be noted that you do have a polygon count limit in ZBrush Core Mini, and I found it to be around 800,000. And you may think, wow, that's probably more than I'll ever need. But if you're not careful, you could be hitting that a lot sooner than you imagine. So again, that's why I advocate just working as low as you can until you need the detail need detail in certain areas, and then upping it. And again, we'll go over that a little more in detail later. So moving over here, we have export image, and this will just save a screen capture of whatever is on the screen in the current orientation. This icon says export for 3D printing, and that's absolutely something you can do if you're knowledgeable about that. But it'll just export it in a file format that you can load into other programs if you just want to render them in other programs or do anything else with it. But for now, in this course, we will not be exporting it, but it's just an option. Unfortunately, they don't have an import feature, so you can't bring in a model you've made somewhere else into ZBrush Core Mini. I wish they had that, but they don't. Right here, you can visit ZBrush Central. That's kind of the main ZBrush forums, and it's great. Lots of inspirational artwork, and you can ask questions there. So it's a great resource. And here we have options to upgrade to ZBrush Core or ZBrush. That's the full-fledged program. ZBrush Core is a slightly more stripped-down version of it that you do have to pay for. And ZBrush is the big daddy of them all. So ZBrush Core Mini is like the gateway ZBrush. It's designed to get you hooked, and if you really think you're digging the digital sculpting, you can decide to move on up. I think ZBrush Core is $179, and this might be $800. I haven't checked the prices recently, just to give you an idea if it's something you might want to think. But again, this program is designed to get you into the digital sculpting, and they make it very easy for you to go further from that. Moving along to the right side of the screen, up at the top, there's this icon for perspective distortion. So this represents the camera, and normally we all see in perspective. That's how our eyes work, and that's how cameras work. I'm going to jump down here just to turn on the floor grid to illustrate. So this is with perspective on, and I'm going to press the button, or you can hit the hotkey P and turn it off, and you could kind of see the shift. This is actually orthographic view, and that's how a lot of CAD modeling is done in, and it's good for lining objects up because you don't have a camera distortion. You can see if I go to the side view, I'll turn on perspective again. You could see how it shifts, and you could see the grid lines actually seem to converge back to a point in the distance, and that's perspective. But with this on, if you were trying to exactly line object together or see a pure silhouette of your model, you might want to turn perspective off. I work with it on most of the time, especially in ZBrush Core Mini. I don't see much of a reason to turn it off. Right below the perspective button is the rotate on y-axis and the rotate on all axes. And just a quick word about working in 3D space. There are 3 axes or planes you can work on, X, Y, and Z. That's why we call it 3D. And the Y is determined, at least in ZBrush's case, to be up and down. So you want to think, if you look at this little green icon there, that's kind of going straight from the top to the bottom. And you want to think of it as like a pivot or a pole going directly through the middle of your model. So when you have it on rotate on the y-axis, it's mostly going to adhere as if that model was on that pin or that rod. And you can get other axes. It's not totally locked to just rotating straight like that. You can get underneath, but it's going to try to keep it mostly on that y-axis. So you're just rotating like that, up and around, and you can get to the top and bottom and on sides. But if we tell it to rotate on all axes, it'll look pretty similar, but you'll be able to get some angles that you can't get with just the y-axis. Like there's a view. We couldn't do that with the y-axis. So mostly I work with it just on the y-axis. It's not really an issue, but there are times when you might want to turn it on all 3. Like here's a case where it's easier for me to make a brush stroke from right to left if I rotate my model on the side view in this case. Sometimes when I'm working just with the Y on, it'll kind of get locked into place and I can't snap it out of it. So I'll turn on the rotate X, Y, and Z, and then it'll snap out of it and I can rotate it to all axes. Below that is the local transforms, and what that signifies is as you're working, you're rotating around just the center of the model. In this case, it's like the camera's locked and pointed at the center. Let's say you are working on some detail over here. You put a brush stroke down. If you turn on local and do a brush stroke, it's going to rotate around your last brush stroke. So this makes it easy to zoom in and work around a specific spot. So if I put a spot over there, then it's now going to rotate around that. So that's helpful if you're working on a very specific area and you want to keep zooming in and out to that spot. Otherwise, just leave that off. Moving on down from there, we've already turned on the floor plane. And this is just a visual guide for if you had some reason you wanted to line your model up on a grid. Working organically, I don't find much of a need to, but I'll explain it anyway, just in case you find some uses for it. So the first thing you'll notice is there are 3 letters in there, the X, Y, and Z, just like we talked about a little earlier. And those represent the axis in which the floor will be drawn on. So right now it's on the Y, which I said was up and down. So if we go to the top view, we can see we have the grid on the up and the down plane. I could turn on the X and the Y, and now if I rotate to the right or left, you can see the grid is on that axis too. And if I turn on the Z, now it's on all planes. It's on the front to back, left to right, and top to bottom. So you may want to use this in conjunction with the orthographic view. If I turn that off and I have those axes, I can see grid markers if you're trying to make certain parts of your model line up. You can find this useful. Again, but for the most part, for organic modeling, I just leave it off, even the floor plane. but I'm going to leave it on just for this next example. So lastly, there's the fit mesh to view. And so what that does, and the hotkey is F, if you press F, it'll line up your model into the view perfectly centered. So sometimes as you're working, you might find your model gets off center. This is an extreme case. And rather than trying to do a bunch of keystrokes to get it back into place, you just press F and it snaps right back. So very useful. This is one I would get in the habit of using. So just remember, if you get a little lost, your orientation is weird, and you find yourself over there, press F. It doesn't rotate the model, it just snaps the model into view. Moving back around to the left side of the screen, we'll start in this area, which are the materials that can be applied to your model. This is only for visual reference. It doesn't affect anything else other than the look of your model while it's on the screen. And if you hover over each one of these, you'll get a little preview of what your model may look like in any of those materials. So it starts off at the matte cap gray, and that's probably one of the best ones to work with because it's pretty evenly lit, and you get some little highlights so you can see your forms. But obviously you can feel free to try out the different materials. Like there's the red wax, and that gives it a slightly different look. These are good for just checking the shadows and forms on your model. This one's called Toy Plastic, and you can see it looks very much like plastic. Very hot specular highlight right there. There's gold. There's a skin shader, which is pretty good, kind of a slightly translucent feel to it. Silver foil makes it look metallic. And there's a flat color, which you may think, well, why would I want that? But this is also actually good for checking the silhouette of your model. And we can go over that later, but silhouette is basically the pure form or outline of the model. And it helps you just see the overall shape rather than get lost in the details. So play around with those, see which one is easiest on your eye and makes you want to sculpt on, and just pick one. Moving up from there, we have the color, and this again is just purely visual for your model. You can click in there the rectangle in the center and get various shades of the current color, which is determined from this larger area around the box. You can slide that and get the different colors in the color spectrum. Again, purely visual, but you can mix these two, the colors and the materials, so you can go for a silver foil with a slightly bluish tinge or any other color you want. Again, I tend to just work pretty purely so I can see the sculpture not get bogged down in colors. Moving up from there, we have all the brushes, and I'll be doing a whole lesson on the brushes, but just know these are your 8 brushes we have to work with, and they're just selected by clicking on them and working on the model. So having said that, let's just move on to the next lesson and see what each one of these brushes does and the different effects you can get with them. So that is the ZBrush Core Mini interface. Hopefully, as you found out, it's really pretty minimal and straightforward. Should you have any confusion about what a button does, I want to mention that if you hover over a button and you hold down the control key, you'll get a little explanation there as well. So if you feel a little lost, just do that. So before moving on to the next lesson, your homework as it were, I would just like you to become comfortable with navigating the model and zooming and panning and framing. Once you're comfortable with that, I'll meet you in the next lesson. So that's the ZBrush Core Mini interface. As you can see, it's pretty simple to get a handle on. And the next lesson, I'm going to be going over the brushes and talk a little more about the polygon count and how it works with the brushes. So until that point, I invite you just to practice navigating the interface and rotating your model and zooming using the hotkeys and panning and turning on and off perspective and things like that. So get comfortable with that, and when you're ready, I'll meet you in the next lesson.